It's taken our Miss Brooks, who teaches English at Madison High School, quite a few years to learn how to get along with her principal, Osgood Conklin. But lately, even in his more difficult moods, he's found ways of getting around him.
Yes, and one of the best ways is up the fire escape on the other side of the building. This is the route I took to class most of last week, when our beloved principal was on one of his infamous economy drives. This newest campaign was particularly ill-timed, since Mr. Boynton badly needed new equipment for his laboratory, and since I badly needed Mr. Boynton a new desk for my room, I was pretty depressed. For 3 days, my landlady saw the gloom gathering, and Thursday morning at breakfast, she tried to dispel it.
Connie, don't you want to let me hear about your problem?
I'd love to, Mrs. Davis, but it's really nothing you can help me with.
Well, all right, dear. If you don't choose to discuss it, I certainly won't pry.
Thanks, Mrs. Davis. I think I'd better keep this to myself.
Just as you say. But I know if it were me, I'd want to tell someone about Mr. Conklin's economy drive and how it's going to affect Mr. Boynton getting his new laboratory equipment and you getting new desks for your classroom.
As I say, I think I'd better keep this to yourself. Mrs. Davis, how did you find out about it?
Well, dear, when I went in to awaken you this morning, you were talking about it in your sleep.
How did I sound?
Clear as a bell.
Good. I'm glad I didn't confuse you by mumbling. Mr. Conklin's newest economy drive is designed to convince the state examiner that he can slash our school budget when he visits Madison today.
Well, there's no point in worrying about it this minute, is there? Dear, why not read the comics? It'll take your mind off things for a while.
No, thanks, Mrs. Davis. I have enough tragedy in my own life.
Well, you don't mind if I glance at the news on the front page, do you?
No, indeed. That'll give me a perfect chance to look at the want ads on the back page.
Same old thing. War, crime, and... Oh, Connie, it's him. It's his picture right here on the front page.
Whose picture?
Connie, he's out. He's out. William Dodson is out.
I had no idea he was in. Who's William Dodson?
Oh, that's right. You wouldn't know. It happened before you came here. Well, this William Dodson was a crook, a housebreaker, and Mr. Conklin was involved in the case.
Mr. Conklin?
Yes. You see, this man Dodson was convicted of armed robbery, and they sent him to prison for 10 years.
I see. And they made Mr. Conklin principal of Madison High.
Mr. Conklin was foreman of the jury which convicted Dodson. The jury was split 11-1 for releasing him, but gradually Mr. Conklin convinced them all of his point of view.
It sounds like the jury was made up of his faculty. But why get so excited, Mrs. Davis?
Well, Dodson claimed he was innocent, and when he heard what had happened, he swore as soon as he got out, he'd find Mr. Conklin and kill him.
And he got out yesterday?
Yeah. The story says he was paroled yesterday.
Well, he'll have to hurry if he wants to do us any good.
Connie, this is no laughing matter. Look at this picture of Mr. Dodson. Look at that thick black hair and those eyebrows, that menacing scowl, that long scar down the side of his face. Does this look like the face of a man who wouldn't use a gun?
This looks like the face of a man who wouldn't have to use a gun. He'd scare his victim to death. But Mrs. Davis, all this happened many years ago. Dodson's certainly forgotten about his threat by now, anyway.
Well, that's probably Walter to drive you to school.
Come on in, Walter.
I'd better go out and get the boys some breakfast.
Greetings, Miss Brooks, on this, one of the blackest days in Madison's annals. What's the matter, Walter? Our football team has had to suspend practice. Why, Walter? No coach? No football. I couldn't think of a better reason if I tried all winter. Certainly, Mr. Conklin's economy drive hasn't been carried that far.
Oh, farther. Harriet tells me the only reason Mr. Conklin's doing it is so the state examiner can see that Madison can operate on a reduced budget while he's here today. What would happen to the budget if Mr. Conklin never saw the examiner?
I suppose it would remain the same.
Well, something's got to be done. Why, things have gotten so bad even the school custodian quit yesterday.
The school custodian?
Yeah, Mr. Conklin cut his salary from $50 a week to $35, plus all the coal he could carry home. How was he going to get any man to work for $35 unless the fellow's desperate, or been out of work for years,
or just out of prison?
Huh?
I think I've got a little idea that will answer our purpose just as well as an accident. It merely involves frightening our principal a bit.
You mean scare him out of his wits, Miss Brooks?
No, Walter, just out of school for a day or two.
But, Daddy, how far can you carry your economy program?
Watch me. It's done solely for the benefit of my school.
But this year's budget provides...
Harriet, this year's budget is subject to revision as soon as Mr. Lonergan arrives this afternoon. However, right now I have the more pressing problem of replacing our school custodian.
Well, that's part of what I'm saying, Daddy. Or the idea of offering a man $35 and all the coal he can carry home. Where are you going to get a man for that?
You may have a point there, child. Perhaps my offer is a bit low.
Well, of course it is.
Well, if I get a really good man, I'll make it all the coal both he and his wife can carry. You'll excuse me, Harriet.
But, Daddy, I'm not through yet.
Oh, if I were a betting man. Harriet, just leave, but come in.
Good morning, Mr. Conklin.
Morning, Harriet.
Oh, hi, Miss Brooks.
Harriet was just on her way out, Miss Brooks.
Oh, but, Daddy,
Miss Brooks, will you kindly say Harriet just left?
Harriet just left?
Thank you. And now, Harriet, you wouldn't want to make a liar out of Miss Brooks.
Oh, all right. Bye, Miss Brooks.
Bye, Harriet.
I know.
You're Matthew Jones?
The inspector for the state board? That's right.
Oh, all right. Bye, Miss Brooks. Bye.
And the financial by saying absolutely no expenditures.
I didn't come in for anything like that. I just stopped by to get news. I heard Mr. Harvey, our school custodian, resigned, so late yesterday afternoon I hired you. I hope I have no authority, Mr. Conklin.
Yes, my dear. Oh, why, that's splendid. Splendid. And this is the work for 35.
And he says he'll be in the coal. His new suit carrying. Yes, he said that one when he left his last job day before yesterday.
Yes, usually good. Last position long.
Yes, sir. He said 7 years in the same place without ever once leaving again.
That's a fine record. What is his name, Miss Brooks?
William Dodson.
That's a good sounding name. That has a real respectable character. What sort of name do you have? William! Miss Brooks!
He is in Dannemora, or is in Ossining Beach in Devil's Island. Why, Mr. Conklin, do you know the man?
No, him. He tried to kill me. I was foreman of the jury that sent him to jail for 10 years. 7 years ago. He's out. Wait a minute. He can't be out of jail yet. He can't. He can't.
William Dodson, the ex-convict, news of his release would be in the paper. Probably right on the front page.
Listen, now you can see it. Things that I haven't read this morning's paper yet. Well, I have it right here on my desk. Let's see now. Nothing but the usual stuff. War, crime. This versus him! I'd recognize that face anywhere. Thick black hair, bushy eyebrows, menacing scowl.
Maybe it's John L. Lewis.
William Dodson is out. He's been paroled. What am I going to do, Miss Brooks? He wants to kill me. Now help me, Miss Brooks. Please help me. Think of something. Think of anything.
Well, there's one thing you could do, Miss Conklin. Get out of town. Or better still, get out of the state.
Good idea, Miss Brooks. Good idea. I'll get out of the state.
That's it. Dodson wouldn't dare kill you in another state. It would be a violation of his parole.
I'll grab the first train. There was no time to lose. I'll leave at once. Goodbye, Miss Brooks. I'll see you when this blows over.
Well, that worked even better than I thought it would. Mr. Conklin, how was your trip?
Just what was I thinking of? I can't leave now. What about my new budget?
Oh, take it with you by all means. Give you something to read on the train.
No, you don't understand. Mr. Lonergan will be here at 3 to go over it with me. It's his only day in town. I can't disappoint him.
But you can't disappoint me either. That is, what about Dodson?
Well, I'll keep Whitman most of the day, Miss Brooks. And when you see Dodson, tell him the job is filled. Tell him one false move, and he'll be back up the river.
Yes, sir, but I hope he gets here before 3.
Why?
Because after that, I'll be up the creek. Well, Mr. Conklin decided he would remain in school, but in hiding until the state examiner arrived that afternoon. He kept himself so well hidden, in fact, that none of us had the slightest idea where he was. That is, until I had occasion to go into the female faculty room to relax for a few moments. Picked the softest, most comfortable armchair I could find and flopped into it.
Get off me this instant.
Well, by noon, when I went down to pick up Mr. Boynton for lunch, I was a bit more wary. When I entered his laboratory, however, I was due for one more shot. Mr. Boynton's face looked as if he was made up for N-Man on the minstrel show. Of course, he had a ready explanation.
I ran into Mr. Conklin, Miss Brooks.
Where, inside the furnace?
He gave me the task of tending the furnace when I ran into him in the infirmary.
The infirmary?
Yes, he signaled to me from under the bed. I know what he was doing under there.
Well, those springs have needed counting for weeks. It's just another hiding place of his, Mr. Interlocutor. Mr. Boynton.
Really? I thought Walter was exaggerating when he told me how you frightened him this morning. Imagine Mr. Conklin worrying about one insignificant paroled prisoner.
Particularly when he's got so many unparoled ones on his own faculty. But unfortunately, he wasn't frightened enough to leave school.
Well, the scheme almost worked, Miss Brooks. But I can't understand any man being so frightened of anyone else. I can frankly say I fear no man.
I know. You concentrate on women. Here, you better use my mirror and wipe the soot off your face, Mr. Boynton.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Miss Brooks. Hey, will you look at me? I really do look like an N-man in a minstrel show. All I need is some lipstick around my mouth, and the disguise would be complete.
If that's an offer, I accept. It would, wouldn't it? Now, if you're through, Mr. Boynton, we'd better be on our way to lunch.
If you don't mind, Miss Brooks, I'd like to clean out my rabbit cage before I go.
Better look inside first. Mr. Conklin may be hiding in there. Besides, in his frame of mind, there must be some way of frightening him out of school before 3.
I don't see how, Miss Brooks, unless William Dodson actually did appear. And that sort of thing simply doesn't happen.
Except to Gary Cooper. Well, forget about the rabbit cage and let's go to lunch.
All right. After you, Miss Brooks.
Say, excuse me.
Yes?
I'm looking for a guy named Osgood Conklin. I tried in his office, but they didn't know where he was. Would either of you know?
Why, yes. If you take a right at the first ash can, then a left at the next infirmary bed, then go straight ahead, you may find him in one of the drain pipes.
We don't know where he is either.
No, we haven't the slightest idea. But pardon me, but you look awfully familiar. Haven't I seen your face somewhere before?
It's possible. If you looked over this morning's paper.
Oh, I looked over it, but you're definitely not Mrs. Davis. However, I'm sure The morning paper. Of course. You're William Dodson.
That's right.
William Dodson.
Oh, don't shoot. Please don't shoot. I'll do anything you say, only please don't shoot. Read your publicity. Shoot Mr. Conklin.
Mr. Conklin? Oh, no. You got me all wrong. Why, I haven't even got a gun.
No gun? What are you going to do? Poison him? Strangle him? Stab him with a knife? Don't make it anything too messy. He cut the cleaning woman's salary, and we wouldn't want to lose her, too. What method do you intend to use? Strangling? Poisoning? What method?
Lady, the only reason I'm here is to thank Mr. Conklin.
Now, that's a method I would never have thought of. Thank him?
You're here to thank him?
But he's the man who convinced the whole jury that you were guilty.
I know. And I'll be grateful to him as long as I live.
If I wasn't so fascinated, I'd faint. But how could you possibly be grateful to him for sending you to jail?
Oh, lady, you don't know what it's like. For the first time, I was living a good, clean life. Good food, plenty of exercise. I had absolutely no worries. My hours were regular, my time my own. I got loads of rest.
Mr. Boynton, you know any good banks we could stick up?
But in spite of all that, you were in prison.
Yes, and it was Mr. Conklin who put you there. And you did threaten to shoot him when you got out.
Lady, that was when I was still a crook with no education. Well, you know, I even went through high school while I was in prison.
I knew it. That ruins most people. That is, you certainly got a lot more out of it than most people.
Well, if you're so determined to thank him, Mr. Dodson, could you please put it off until tomorrow?
That's it. Threaten him today and thank him tomorrow.
Look, I don't even know what you two are talking about, but I've been waiting 7 long years to thank Mr. Conklin, and today's the day I'm going to do it, just as soon as I can find him.
Then find him you will, Mr. Dodson, and I know Mr. Boynton will be delighted to help you.
I will?
Yes, I just recalled Mr. Conklin saying he was going down to the boiler room to speak to the new school custodian. You know, Mr. Boynton, the room with the big heavy door with the big lock.
Oh, yes, the boiler room. Come on, Mr. Dodson, I'll take you down there.
Well, thanks, but I won't be putting you out, will I?
Oh, I don't mind putting myself out a little.
No, indeed, particularly when it's more important to put someone else in. With the state examiner due any minute and Dodson locked in the locker room, it's the only chance we've got, Walter.
Yeah, but if this doesn't get Mr. Conklin out of school, what are we going to do, Miss Brooks?
I may consider blasting. This ought to do the trick, particularly if Mrs. Davis and Mr. Boynton come through as hoped for.
Oh, I'm sure they will.
Well, here we are. Now, are you certain the invisible man, Mr. Conklin, is in his office?
Oh, I can't be positive, Miss Brooks, but 5 minutes ago, I did see someone sneak in Miss Enright's coat and hat.
That's Mr. Conklin.
Oh, that's funny. But I could have sworn he was in there.
Oh, he's in there. It's just difficult to hear anything from under the desk. Go in.
Oh, okay. Good luck, Miss Brooks.
Mr. Conklin, Mr. Conklin.
Oh, it's you, Miss Brooks. Goodness, I almost wrenched my back leaping under the desk. For a moment, I thought it was you-know-who.
Well, that's what I came in to see you about, sir. You know who, Dodson, is coming.
I'm going. When did you speak to him, Miss Brooks?
I finally spoke to him on the phone not 2 minutes ago. I told him he was fired, but he didn't take it at all well.
What do you mean?
He said he'd be right over to kill you. You better leave at once, sir.
Oh, I want to, Miss Brooks, but Mr. Lonergan will be here in a minute, and he expects to see me.
Conklin, forgive me for breaking in like this, sir, but get out as quick as you can. Flee for your life. He's in the building.
He's in the building? Who's in the building?
That's who. It's Dodson, Mr. Conklin.
Yes, sir. Get out while you still can. It was all I could do to get here ahead of him to warn you.
But Miss Brooks only spoke to him on the phone 2 minutes ago, Boynton.
He was probably calling from the corner drugstore. You better get out at once, sir.
Oh, yes, at once. You didn't tell him the truth about where I was, did you, Boynton?
Oh, I had to, sir. He forced me to at the point of a gun, Mr. Conklin.
At the point of a gun? Then it's true, he's got a gun. If he's headed this way, I can't get out in time. Quick, lock the door. Never mind. I'll do it. Here. At least that ought to hold it for a little while.
All right, Conklin, you rat. I've waited 7 long years for this. Open up. I've got 6 bullets, and they've all got your name on them.
Well, don't worry, sir. These 3 are bound to miss. It's the law of averages.
Oh, please, Mr. Dodson, please, I beseech you, don't kill our principal. It's only one life to you, but hundreds of us kids depend on him.
Walter's begging for your life, sir. What do you expect? That idiot Denton's always begging for something.
Big boy, big!
Oh, get away from me, kid. This is where Conklin gets it. All right, Conklin. If you won't open up, I'll get a fire axe and break the door down.
And do. He's going to get an axe and break the door down.
This I gotta see. Now's your chance, sir.
My chance?
While he's away, you can escape through your inner office.
Oh, yes, I never thought of that. You are in the office. I'll leave it once, yes.
Hello, Mr. Conklin. Remember me, William Dodson?
Oh, no.
But I'm sorry. I haven't time now to renew old acquaintances. There's a maniac on the loose outside, and he's... William Dodson! Please don't shoot! I beg of you, please don't shoot me!
Look, Mr. Conklin, I don't know what this is all about, but I'm not here to kill you.
Not here to kill me? But you were threatening me a minute ago outside the door. I don't understand.
Oh, I do, sir. This man is obviously an imposter. You can still escape if you
Mr.
go...
Conklin, hurting you is the furthest thing from my mind. Why, while I was in jail, I became a completely honest man.
But 7 years ago, you swore you'd kill me when you got out.
Yes, and if you're so honest, the only thing you can do is to keep your word.
Sir, the reason I came by today was to thank you.
You came by to thank me?
Sir, you're not going to believe that after what you just heard outside the door?
Mr. Conklin, I'll always be grateful to you for giving me the 7 best years of my life. But when I told these people I wanted to thank you, they locked me in the boiler room.
What?
Oh, we had to, sir. How did we know what he'd do after he thanked you? After all, you heard him threaten you. How do you know what he'll do next? Look, there's still time to escape, sir.
All right, Conklin. I'll give you 3 to open up, and then I'll break the door down.
Indeed, there's still time for Mr. Boynton and me to escape. Come on, Mr. Boynton.
Just a moment, Miss Brooks. Now, who would that be?
Maybe Dodson has a twin brother, sir.
Well, suppose we open the door and find out who it is, shall we?
I'd just as soon remain in the dark if it's all the same to you.
Well, hello, Margaret.
Don't plead with me, you fake.
use, Mrs. Davis. I'm sure he recognizes you.
I thought so. I had a feeling this handkerchief over my face wouldn't do much good.
Not only do I recognize you, Margaret, but I finally recognize Miss Machiavelli's little scheme. You thought you'd frighten me off the premises before Mr. Lonergan arrived, didn't you, Miss Brooks? My, what will the members of my faculty think of next?
This is your faculty? Boy, am I glad I took my high school courses by correspondence.
You haven't a thing on me. I wish I taught that way.
Mr. Conklin, I know all this looks bad, but we had to do something. What would we have done after you presented your revised budget to Mr. Lonergan?
You would have done extremely well, Boyden, since I had revised it appreciably upward.
Upward?
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 You can close your collective mouth now. My emergency program was designed to convince Mr. Lonergan that no school could exist on our current expenditures. The revised budget is right over here on the desk. Anybody care to see it before I make one more revision?
One more revision?
Yes, Miss Brooks.
Now, if you'll excuse me, sir, I, too, have one revision to make around here.
Miss Brooks, why did you break that window pane?
Since the window was locked, it was the only way I could jump out.
Miss Brooks, starring Eve Arden, transcribed, is produced and directed by Larry Burns, written by Joe Killen, with the music of Wilbur Hatch. Mr. Conklin was played by Gail Gordon. Others in tonight's cast were Jane Morgan, Dick Crenna, Bob Rockwell, Gloria McMillan, and Mary Jane Cross. This is Wendell Niles inviting you to be with us again next Sunday at the same time for another comedy episode of Our Miss Brooks. This is the CBS Radio Network.
Palmolive Soap, Colgate Dental Cream, and Palmolive Shave Cream bring you Our Miss Brooks, starring Eve Arden. It's time once again for another comedy episode of Our Miss Brooks. One of the truly fine friendships our Miss Brooks has made in her years of teaching English at Madison High School is the one with her landlady, Mrs. Davis. Their friendship is so close that there are times when each knows what the other is thinking without either saying a word.
No, not one word. All Mrs. Davis has to do is raise 6 fingers, and I know just how many weeks I'm behind in my room rent. And all I have to do is make a circle with my thumb and forefinger, and she knows how much chance she has of getting it. However, last Thursday morning, when another week's rent was due, Mrs. Davis was at a meeting of her Ladies' Aid Club, preparatory to inaugurating their new clubhouse that evening. Taking her place at breakfast with me was one Walter Denton, who usually managed to eat as if he were 3 Walter Dentons. On Thursday, he was doing his best to live up to his reputation. You enjoying your breakfast, Walter? Just nod your head, boy. No words could possibly escape through that barrier.
Pardon me, dear teacher, but you caught me with my jaws chock full of Mrs. Davis's salubrious victuals.
I know. The trick is to catch you when they aren't. Now, if you're through, we'd better be on our way to school.
All right, but first I have something to show you.
Really? What?
Well, if you'll step to the window and pull up the blinds, I'm sure you'll get a big surprise.
What are you going to do, push me out?
Come on, Miss Brooks. It's standing right in front of the house.
All right, let's see what it is.
There. Feast your lovely orbs upon it, dear teacher. Your newest means of transportation.
Where? All I see out there is a broken-down moving van.
Isn't she a beauty? I own it. Or rather, Bone Snodgrass and I own it together. We traded our jalopies in for the moving van the day before yesterday. As soon as we saw it, we knew this would be the perfect business for the firm of Denton and Snodgrass. A firm that combines brawn and brains.
Really? Who's the third partner? Oh, you're the brains.
Yeah, and to prove it, I already have our first order from Mrs. Conway, a friend of my mother's. She wants the stuff delivered tomorrow morning. Yeah, out in yonder van is her entire one-room suite of furniture, complete with chandelier.
Oh, good. My one ambition has always been to ride to school hanging from a chandelier. So far, you've had me hanging from everything else.
I'm not kidding, Miss Brooks. This venture is the most important of my life. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm still faced with one or two problems, one of which I feel certain you can help me with.
How?
Oh, it's very simple. It concerns where I'm going to leave my moving van overnight tonight. I thought you'd persuade Mrs. Davis to let me leave it in her driveway. Would you, Miss Brooks?
Well, I suppose...
Oh, thank you, Miss Brooks. I knew you would. Well, now that that's all settled, I guess we'd better be on our way to school. Yeah, unless you want to pick up something before we go?
Only the rest of my last sentence. However, I suppose you could leave the van in our driveway overnight, since Mrs. Davis won't be using her car till it's repaired. Now, we'd really better get going. Unfortunately, I have to see Mr. Conklin first thing this morning.
You do? Well, now that is a coincidence, since Mr. Conklin happens to be the second problem you can help me with.
I'm sorry. One truck is all our driveway can handle. That is, you'll have to handle Mr. Conklin yourself, Walter.
No, it won't be difficult, Miss Brooks. It's just that I have to drive this van past his office window to put it in the school parking lot. And if he happens to see it, he's liable to erupt like Old Faithful.
Oh, our boy is at least twice as juicy. But I fail to see how
All you have to do is keep him from looking out of the window for a few minutes, Miss Brooks.
I guess I could do that.
Well, of course you could. Just keep him looking at you.
That's an idea, Walter. If he can spoil my morning, I can spoil his.
But Osgood, I promised the ladies you'd speak when we inaugurated our new clubhouse tonight. Can't you possibly make it?
Martha, there's nothing I'd rather do. Nothing in the world. But can I help it if I have to be out of town tonight on business for Mr. Stone?
Oh, I suppose not. But this business for Mr. Stone certainly came up awfully suddenly.
Well, you told me about the meeting awfully suddenly. That is, I would have let you know sooner, but I didn't think it was necessary until you told me about the meeting.
Well, it certainly seems strange to me. You had to go out of town for Mr. Stone the last time my Ladies' Aid group asked you to speak, too.
The man has a simply uncanny knack of picking just the wrong night.
Osgood, it isn't the $50 you were asked to contribute after we inaugurated our last clubhouse, is it?
Magnolia Blossom. How could you even think such a thing?
If for a moment I thought it was the $50.
Poopsie girl. How could you doubt your Osgood? Oh, just a moment, Martha. There's someone at the door. Come in.
Good morning, sir. I have the report.
Oh, it's you, Miss Brooks. Excuse me. My wife's hanging on the phone.
Well, quick, cut her down. You're speaking to her. Well, go right ahead, sir. I'll wait.
Hello, angel eyes. Just put all those horrid doubts out of your mind. When your Osgood says he has to go out of town on business for Mr. Stone, your Osgood means exactly that. I'll see you before I go. Goodbye, Pet. Miss Brooks, can you imagine my wife not wanting to believe I have to be away from home overnight?
Seems incredible to me. Then you really have to go away on business, your Osgood? Mr. Conklin?
Of course I have to. Do you think because my wife's Ladies' Aid group wants me to speak and perhaps contribute $50 tonight that I'd resort to the twin shames of deceit and subterfuge?
Which hotel are you staying at in town, sir?
Oh, I wouldn't dare stay at a hotel. It's much too risky. Well, if you must know, I simply can't afford the $50, Miss Brooks. And now that my secret is out, perhaps you can help me find a place to sleep tonight.
Oh, I'd like to, sir, but our driveway is already spoken for. That is, most of the people we know are members of your wife's group.
I know, and if she ever finds out about it... You. What was that?
What was what?
Those sounds outside my window. That was either a truck backfiring or those were shots.
I knew someone would catch up with Miss Enright sooner or later. My, isn't it awfully bright in here, sir? I don't know when I've seen such a glare from the sun. I'd better pull down your shade.
Glare from the sun? What are you talking about? How could there be any sun in here this time of morning? My windows face west.
Well, the days are getting awfully short this time of year. Anyway, there's no use waiting till the last second. Now, I'll just pull...
That is a truck backfiring. Well, I'll soon see what it's doing outside my window.
Oh, but Mr. Compton, I'm certain that...
Holy cow, it's a moving van. And Walter Denton's driving it to our parking lot. What is that idiot Denton doing with a moving van?
Maybe his books are heavier than the other kids.
Miss Brooks, you didn't want me to see that van pass my window, did you? Now, suppose you tell me what this is all about.
Well, since you've already seen it, sir, I suppose there's no harm in telling you that Walter and Bone Snodgrass have gone into the moving business together.
They've gone into the moving business?
Yes, sir. They've already got their first order from a Mrs. Conway. Her entire one-room suite is on that van. They're delivering it tomorrow, and they just need a place to put their van till they collect the money for it. Tonight, I'm letting them leave it in our driveway, and
so you're a collaborator on this scheme. A scheme which is against all the rules of this school. Using school property to conduct a full-time business is the severest offense I can conceive of. An offense demanding instant expulsion from... They've got a one-room suite on that van.
Shall I tell them they can re-enroll now, sir?
Miss Brooks, is that a complete one-room suite?
Yes, sir. Complete with chairs, bed, and built-in principal. It's got...
I think it might be just what I'm looking for, Miss Brooks. Yes, just what I need. A perfect place to spend the night. Now, no one must know about this, Miss Brooks.
Oh, no, sir.
Neither students nor faculty. This is a secret which you must carry with you to your grave. Understand?
Yes, sir. If I don't, that may happen a lot sooner than I expect.
Miss Brooks, wait a minute.
Oh, hello, Mr. Boynton. How's everything?
Well, Miss Brooks, I'm faced with a problem. Now, I don't want you to think I'm crying on your shoulder.
Just put your head there and let me worry. I won't, Mr. Boynton. What's your problem?
Well, it's the same old thing. That is, it's something old and yet something new.
Make that something borrowed and something blue, and I might get interested. I still don't understand.
Well, I'm slightly in arrears in my room rent to Mrs. Miller.
But we're all slightly in arrears in our rent, Mr. Boynton. How much are you behind?
Counting this week?
Yes.
3 months.
I'll give you Mrs. Davis in 6 weeks. Say, you are in trouble, aren't you?
Up to my neck. Mrs. Miller is so angry she threatened to hand me my eviction notice if I didn't have some of the rent by tonight. She's stopping by before her ladies' aid meeting at 8 and again when it's over.
Well, what are you going to do?
Well, the only thing I can do is find some other place to stay overnight. Oh, I know by tomorrow she'll calm down and reconsider. However, I did think of one possibility. A place you could help me with where no one would think of finding me.
Where, I'm reasonably certain.
Well, now, don't laugh when I say this, but Walter's moving van would be perfect for my purposes.
That's not a moving van. That's a hotel. Mr. Boynton, I'd like to help.
Walter told me it'll be in your driveway overnight, and if you'll let me stay there, I'll be in your debt as long as I live.
Well, all right, Mr. Boynton, but there's something I'd better warn you about in case you wake up in the middle of the night.
What's that?
If you happen to find 2 feet in your face, don't be alarmed. They're not yours. Well, when I agreed to let Walter leave his moving van in Mrs. Davis's driveway overnight, I had no idea I'd have to put a quiet, do not disturb sign on its rear doors. But with Mr. Conklin and Mr. Boynton persuading me to let them use it as sleeping quarters for the night, I felt like a desk clerk without portfolio. I was quietly cursing the brains of the firm of Denton and Snodgrass on my way to the school cafeteria at noon when I happened to run into the Brawn.
Hi, Miss Brooks.
Hello, Bones. How's everything with Denton, Snodgrass and Company?
I think you made a mistake, Miss Brooks.
A mistake?
Yeah, there's my brother Stretch Snodgrass and me. Bone Snodgrass, but there ain't no one named Denton Snodgrass.
I'm talking about Walter Denton.
Oh, well, I'm going to meet Waller after lunch. And boy, have I got some good news for him.
You have?
Yeah. Well, that Waller thinks he's so smart just because he got an order from Mrs. Conway. Wait till he hears about the order I got. Mrs. Davis gave me an order to move all her furniture from our old clubhouse to a new one tonight.
Mrs. Davis can't do this. Not with Mr. Boynton and Mr. Conklin asleep. Excuse me, Bones. I've got to make a phone call in an awful hurry. Of all the people to pick to give the moving job to, I can't...
Hello?
Hello, Mrs. Davis. This is Connie.
Oh, Connie, could you call me back a little later? I'm expecting phone calls from Maud Richards, Peggy Lowell, and Sally Norton about the clubhouse inaugural tonight. If I talk to you, I'm liable to get all confused.
You won't get confused. I want to talk about clubhouse business, too.
Well, all right, if you say so. What is it, Maud?
Mrs. Davis, please. Look, I'm calling about the moving job you gave Walter and Bones Snodgrass. You've got to cancel it.
But why, dear? Walter and Bones are such nice boys. They deserve to get a start in business.
Of course they do, and I wouldn't ask this of you unless there was an excellent reason. I'll tell you what it is if you'll keep it a secret. Promise me you'll forget it as soon as I tell it to you.
Oh, you can trust me, Sally.
I can't think of anyone I could trust more. All right, Mrs. Davis, the reason I'm asking this favor is that Mr. Conklin and Mr. Boynton are going to be in the moving van tonight.
Really, dear? Who gave the order to move them?
They're sleeping in it, Mrs. Davis. Neither of them wants it known where they are for one night.
How exciting. They're hiding out. Well, trust me to dummy up, kid. I wouldn't squeal when two of the mob are keeping under cover from the bulls.
Oh, fine. Our television set has been fixed again. Then you will call Bones, Mrs. Davis.
Of course I will.
Can I depend on it? Just as soon as I hang up?
I'll do it as soon as you hang up, Peggy.
All right, then. Bye, Hortense.
Gosh, Waller, I don't understand what happened. This dame give me the order, and an hour later she calls back and cancels it.
Well, don't let it bother you. I got another order myself a little while ago. The biggest order we've had so far.
Hey, that's great. Who'd you get it from?
From Mrs. Conklin. I phoned her a half hour ago, and we're moving all the furniture from her old clubhouse to her new one tonight. How's that for using the old bean?
Boy, I gotta hand it to you, Waller. I wish I had thought of that idea.
Gosh, Miss Brooks, I don't understand the rush to get over here. It's only 8 o'clock.
I wanted you to get comfortable before Mr. Conklin arrived.
But you said he wouldn't be here till 9 o'clock. That gives us an extra hour in this moving van.
I know. A full hour. Alone. In a crowded moving van. Just the two of us. You and me. Let's sit down, shall we, Mr. Boynton?
Say, I just noticed. There seems to be a lot more furniture in here than earlier in the day. Extra chairs, tables, that big couch.
Probably the rest of Mrs. Conway's suite. Sit down, Mr. Boynton.
Maybe so, but those pictures of Washington and Jefferson weren't here earlier either. Nor this huge American flag.
No, they weren't. Sit down, Mr. Boynton.
What would Mrs. Conway be doing with a huge flag in her room?
Maybe she likes to salute before she goes to bed. Sit down, Mr. Boynton.
This couch is nice and comfortable. You know, Miss Brooks, this situation would really be rather humorous if it didn't have such serious overtones. Did you ever imagine we'd sit huddled together in a crowded moving van, just the two of us, with just a dim light bulb between us and complete darkness?
You haven't got a BB gun on you, have you?
Well, I suppose we might as well do something while we're waiting for Mr. Conklin to arrive.
Yes, we might as well, mightn't we? We might as well do that. We certainly might.
Now, what would be something for two people to do in the semi-darkness of a gloomy movie?
Two guesses, and I'm already puckered up.
Oh, I've got it, of course. Let's play ghosts.
Why play it? I already am one. Mr. Boynton, if playing ghosts is the only thing you can...
Good evening, Miss Brooks.
The man is haunted. Oh, I wasn't expecting you so early, Mr. Conklin.
Apparently not. Mr. Boynton, what are you doing here? Miss Brooks, does Boynton know about me?
Yes, sir, but you don't know about him. Mr. Conklin, this is your new bunkie.
My new bunkie?
Yes, sir. You see, since we're both in the same boat, trying to avoid a member of the Ladies' Aid Club for one night, Miss Brooks and I figured you wouldn't mind if I slept here with you. I'm no trouble at all during the 8 hours I'm asleep.
And to prove it, just watch him the 16 hours he's awake.
Well, I don't care what kind of a roommate you are, Boynton.
Hello, folks. The doors was open, so I just...
Snodgrass? Snodgrass? What are you doing here?
I think you made a mistake, Mr. Conklin. There's my brother, Stretch Snodgrass, and me, Bone Snodgrass, but...
We know there's no Snodgrass. But what are you doing here, Bones?
Well, I might as well ask you all the same question. It's my moving van.
Yes, but it's our question.
Well, Walter and me have got this furniture to deliver right away. So far, this deal has been nothing but a lot of anger-ravation.
Anger-ravation?
Yeah, you know. Exasperation.
Oh, you mean irritation.
That's it. Now, if you'll step inside, Miss Brooks, I'll pull up the ramp.
What?
Snodgrass, where are you taking us?
All right, Walter. Let her go.
Let it... Miss Brooks, we're moving.
Yes, sir. That's what frequently happens with a moving van.
Snodgrass, I insist that you tell us immediately where we're going.
It'll only take a couple of minutes to deliver this furniture to your wife's Ladies' Aid Club, Mr. Conklin, and we'll have the van right back in the driveway.
Oh, well, if it'll only take a couple of minutes to deliver it, I certainly won't be unreasonable about it, particularly since we'll be using the van for the... Deliver this furniture to my wife's Ladies' Aid Club!
Deliver the furniture to Mrs. Conklin's Ladies' Aid Club?
I vote aye and make it unanimous.
Snodgrass, have Denton stop this van immediately. Immediately, do you hear? Denton, stop this truck at once. Halt, I say.
Looks like he's forgotten the password. He can't possibly hear you, sir. All this furniture's made the interior soundproof.
Yes, but Miss Brooks, in another minute we'll be at the new clubhouse. What am I going to do? I've only got one more minute. Now, please, Miss Brooks, help me.
All right, you start thinking of a speech while I look through your pockets for the $50. The only other thing I can think of is for you to hide, sir.
Good, very good, yes. Now, where will I hide?
How about the big couch, sir? You could stretch out under the soft cushions.
Yes, good idea, under the cushions. But are you certain no one will see me under them?
Even if they did, it would look like nothing but more cushions.
Miss Brooks, can I use the couch, too?
Nothing doing. You had your chance before. But maybe you could get behind the couch. Now, hurry up. The van's stopping.
Oh.
Bones, lower the ramp and then go up front and tell Walter to stay up there until I can get rid of Mrs. Conklin.
Okay, Miss Brooks.
See you later.
Why, Miss Brooks, what a pleasant surprise.
Oh, hello, Mrs. Conklin.
Are you here to help us launch our new clubhouse?
Just hand me a champagne bottle and stand back. That is, I felt since Walter and Bones were driving over anyway, I'd come along with you.
Oh, it's a madhouse in there, my dear. 100 women milling around and practically no furniture. Why don't we just sit on the couch in the van and talk?
Oh, sit on the van and the couch? I mean, sit on the man and the couch. Talk on the couch to the van? We can't sit on the couch, Mrs. Conklin.
Oh, Why not? Nothing happened to it on the way over, did it?
That's it. Something happened. Something dreadful happened to the couch.
Really? To its legs?
That's it. It acquired 2 more. It lost 2.
Well, it looks perfectly all right to me. I'm sure whatever happened won't prevent us from sitting on it.
Oh, no, really, Mrs. Conklin. Don't sit there. You'd better not.
What was that?
What was what?
When I sat down just now, I heard an oof.
That was I. When you sat down, I said you'd better get oof.
Wrong with this couch. Why, it's sturdy as can be. Look, to prove it, I'll stand up and flop right down on it again.
Oh, no.
Now, just watch. You see, nothing happens when I fall down. Don't tell me you didn't hear that, Miss Brooks.
Maybe the couch creaked. Many couches do that, you know.
I heard a groan.
Very few couches do that. But we'd really better go in, Mrs.
There's someone under those cushions.
Oh, no, there couldn't possibly
Miss Brooks, there's a body under there.
Don't be alarmed. I doubt if it's still alive.
Well, I'll just take off this cushion and...
Hello, Poopsie girl.
Osgood Conklin, of all the low-down, underhanded, malicious...
Now, Twinkle Toes. Give your Osgood a chance to explain.
Oh, don't even try, sir. Mrs. Conklin, there is only one explanation that covers all situations like this one.
One explanation? What's that, Miss Brooks?
Your husband was standing on a corner, minding his own business, waiting for a moving van. Oh, after Mr. Boynton was discovered, too, I really got busy and thought up a whale of a story. I practically convinced Mrs. Conklin that both her husband and Mr. Boynton had done this merely to surprise her and help with the clubhouse inaugural.
Well, I still can't quite believe it, Miss Brooks. But I know Mrs. Miller will be as delighted to see Mr. Boynton as I am to see Osgood.
Did my landlady mention me this evening, Mrs. Conklin?
Well, yes, she did, Mr. Boynton, but I forget what it was about. This has been such a hectic night. Oh, dear. Frankly, I don't see why we moved at all when we'll only use this new clubhouse for a few hours, twice a week.
You mean you only meet here twice a week?
That's right. The rest of the week, it's dark.
It is? Well, don't be surprised if you happen to be passing some night and it's not completely dark, Mrs. Conklin.
Why, what do you mean, Miss Brooks?
Mr. Boynton tells me he likes to read before he goes to sleep at night.
Bring you Our Miss Brooks, starring Eve Arden. Although it was a difficult decision to make, our Miss Brooks, who teaches English at Madison High School, finally made it. So after 5 years of practically going steady with Philip Boynton, last week she finally gave the green light to other men.
Yes, last week I gave them the green light, and since then they've acted as though my street is under repairs. However, I did meet a salesman named Freddie Stewart. And when a girl has spent 5 years being taken to a hot dog stand for dinner, a movie, and then a soda fountain afterward, anything would seem like a change. So Wednesday night, I went out with Freddie, and the evening seemed most enjoyable. The hot dogs were delicious. The movie great, and the double malteds were out of this world. But of far greater interest than my latest acquaintance was my landlady's new heartthrob. For the past 2 weeks, Mrs. Davis had been trying to conceal her little romance, and I had been trying to conceal my curiosity. By breakfast time Thursday, I could no longer bear the suspense. But before I could ask her about it, Mrs. Davis posed a question of her own.
I suppose you've been wondering where I've been spending my evenings in the last few weeks.
The question did cross my mind.
Well, dear, I've been going with the most wonderful man. Oh, Connie,
He's so whirly, so suave, so debonair, so romantic.
Who is he, Mrs. Davis?
Henry, our butcher.
Our butcher?
Yes, that's the man who's been dating me. And I have further news for you. Now hold on to your seat, dear. I'm even thinking of marrying him.
Well, that's one way of being sure of the choice cuts. Mrs. Davis, you're not serious.
Oh, but I am, Connie. Henry Pringle seems just right for me in every way.
But, Mrs. Davis, this seems incredible. Who is he? What do you know about him? Where did you meet him?
I met him over the phone about 3 weeks ago.
You met him over the phone?
That's right. I was calling in my order to Schmidt's butcher shop the way I generally do, and Henry answered it.
But how did you finally meet him in person, Mrs. Davis?
Well, 4 days after that first call, Henry appeared at our house in the afternoon with a large box tied with a wide red ribbon.
He brought you some flowers?
No, dear. Our pot roast for that night. Well, he asked me for a date, and from then on, we started going together steadily. As you know, I've been out almost every other night. And last night, he popped the question.
Well, I'm glad you didn't pop the answer. Mrs. Davis, you know I want you to be happy more than anything else in the world, but you've gone with Henry such a short time. After all, what do you really know about him? What has he told you about himself?
Well, dear, he's a bachelor, been in town a month, and he's Mr. Schmidt's partner.
But do any of your friends know him? And why hasn't he ever come over to the house to meet me?
Well, I suggested it, Connie, but Henry is very bashful. However, he was going to meet you up to the time I told him you taught English at Madison High. That's when he backed out.
Well, I won't hold that against him. That's when most men back out.
Anyway, dear, you'll meet him tonight. I invited him to dinner, and I told him I'd give him my answer then.
Mrs. Davis, not so soon. Oh, that must be Walter to drive me to school. Be out in a minute, Walter. Look, Mrs. Davis, I have to leave now, but please think this over for at least another week. Wait until you know a little more about Henry.
I've already thought it over, Connie. And now that I've made up my mind, I can hardly wait to change my name to Pringle.
Oh, well, that's all right, Mrs. Davis.
Then you agree with me?
Certainly. Change your name to whatever you like, only don't marry Henry until you know him better.
Gosh, Miss Brooks, you haven't said a word since you got in the car. It isn't my driving that's bothering you, is it?
No, Walter. I'm worried about something else today.
Oh, well, I wouldn't worry about that, Miss Brooks. I mean, what can you expect when last night was the first date you had with him?
What? Walter, how did you know I had a date last night?
Well, Harriet and I saw you in the balcony of the Bijou last night. Hey, what'd you think of Beat the Devil, Miss Brooks?
Oh, my date wasn't that bad. Oh, you mean the picture. I thought Humphrey Bogart was fine. But I'm not thinking about myself, Walter. This concerns someone else.
Well, you're certainly not worried about Mrs. Davis's romance, are you?
And you know about that, too. How did you find out about that?
Yeah, I was also up in the balcony with Harriet the night before.
You went to the same movie with Harriet 2 nights in a row?
And tonight I'm going back alone and see the picture.
But the other night you saw Mrs. Davis up there with someone, hmm?
Boy, was she with someone, Miss Brooks. Ooh, la, la.
Walter, I can't say I care for that ooh, and even less for those la-las.
Oh, well, I didn't mean any disrespect, Miss Brooks, but Mrs. Davis and this old fellow certainly did seem to be enjoying each other's company. No, honestly, Harriet and I thought we'd pop the way they were popping popcorn into each other's mouth. Cute.
Well, that's exactly what's worrying me. She's thinking seriously of popping popcorn into her friend's mouth for the rest of her life.
Well, you mean marrying the guy? Oh, but that's wonderful, Miss Brooks.
Wonderful?
Well, certainly.
Oh, what could be more romantic than two lonely old people in the autumn of their lives who find the warm glow of companionship and thus walk hand in hand into the setting sun together.
Followed by two men from a collection agency and the sheriff. Walter, Mrs. Davis has known this man for a little over 2 weeks. What does she really know about him? About his background, his finances?
Well, but Mrs. Davis is a mature woman, Miss Brooks. She ought to know what she's doing.
Not in this case. But since we're practically on the school grounds, Walter, we'd better drop the subject for the time being.
Oh, sure. I'll say, isn't that Harriet and old Marblehead? Yeah. Mr. Conklin out in front of the school, Miss Brooks?
Why, so it is. I wonder what our principal's doing outside school.
Well, maybe he figures that gives him more room to pounce on us.
No, I hardly think so, but apparently there's something terribly wrong today.
Why, Miss Brooks?
He's smiling.
Yeah. I wonder who he expelled.
Well, it seems we're all arriving about the same time this morning. Good morning, Miss Brooks.
Good morning, sir. Morning, Harriet.
Good morning, Miss Brooks.
How are you this morning, Denton?
Oh, fine, sir. Simply fine. Want to drive to the back lot with me, Harriet?
Oh, I'd like to, Walter, but, well, you know how Daddy feels about the two of us.
Go right ahead, my dear.
Now, really, Mr. Conklin, I must protest against the constant injustice of never permitting your daughter to accompany me on so simple a journey as... Did you say go right ahead?
Now take that souped-up flying saucer out of here before I change my mind.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Hop in, Harry.
Okay. Oh, thanks, Daddy.
I don't know what it is, but that boy always leaves me boiling. I can't remember when I've been in such a good humor.
I can't either. That is, you certainly did seem in a fine humor this morning, sir.
And well, I might be, too. We had some very good news at our house last night. It concerns my wife's sister, Mildred. You've heard me mention her, the single one who comes to our house and stays for months at a time.
You mean she's finally getting married?
No, that's just it. She's not.
But how is that good news, sir?
Well, we were suspicious of the fellow right from the beginning. From everything Mildred told us about him, he only seemed to be interested in her for her money.
He did?
So I began to do a little private investigating and found the fellow had once been a confidence man and had landed in jail twice. Mildred wouldn't believe me, but luckily when I phoned him and confronted him with the evidence, he told me to stop worrying, that he'd found a new sucker anyway.
Mr. Conklin, hadn't you ever met this man before?
No, that was one of the things that first aroused my suspicions. He never would come over to the house to meet us.
I think I'm beginning to feel a little faint. Then how did you know where to call?
Oh, that was easy. I knew his name and how Mildred had met him, so I simply called Schmidt's butcher shop where he worked.
Mr. Conklin, will you excuse me for a few moments?
Why, what are you going to do, Miss Brooks?
First, I'm going to make a quick phone call, and then I'm going to become a vegetarian. Well, I'd heard of older people arriving at the age of indiscretion before. However, not only did my landlady arrive, but I think she intends to spend the rest of her life there. When I finally reached her on the phone just before noon, the results of our conversation practically floored me. She refused to believe a word of what Mr. Conklin had said about Henry. Naturally, I had to discuss my problem with someone, so over our lunch table in the cafeteria a little while later, Mr. Boynton was elected. His quick, incisive mind instantly grasped the problem, and his first crystal-clear statement went right to the heart of it.
Boy, I'd sure hate to be in Mrs. Davis' place.
Oh, you'd be too tall for Henry anyway. Yes, it is a mess, isn't it? Particularly since Mrs. Davis is giving Henry her decision to marry him tonight.
Oh, well, now, let me get this straight, Miss Brooks. You say you called Mrs. Davis and gave her the information Mr. Conklin gave you?
Yes, I told her Mr. Conklin said that Henry was a confidence man, had been in jail twice, and had told him he didn't care about Conklin's sister-in-law anymore because he'd found another sucker.
And exactly what was Mrs. Davis' reaction?
She asked me what else was new.
That seems incredible. Was that all she said?
Well, not entirely.
Oh, I didn't think so.
She also said to be sure to pick up a can of vegetable soup on the way home this afternoon.
But, Miss Brooks, didn't you ask her why she wasn't concerned with what you told her?
Of course I did. And Mrs. Davis claimed that Mr. Conklin was spreading the story because he was angry that Henry hadn't married Mildred.
Oh, then she knew about the episode.
Yes, it seems Henry had already covered himself on that score. He told her that she might hear some wild stories about him because he'd been seeing Mildred. And when he had met Mrs. Davis, he gave her up.
Gosh, then what will happen to Mrs. Davis? Will she learn the real truth in time?
Listen again tomorrow to another thrilling episode as Margaret faces life. But I'm really worried, Mr. Boynton. There must be some way to bring her to her senses.
I wish I could help. Sometimes when I'm faced with a vexing problem, I find a solution by observing how my frogs and rabbits react under similar circumstances.
It won't work here. Very few frogs and rabbits consider marrying confidence men.
Well, that isn't quite
if there
what
were
I'm...
only some way to convince her that people don't marry so hastily, at least until they've looked into the other person's background. If anyone else were doing the same thing, I know Mrs. Davis would condemn it.
Miss Brooks, wait. I think you've got something.
Well, after all these years, it's about time you do. Oh, you mean I've given you an idea?
Oh. I'll say you did. Now tell me, how was your new date last night?
Next time I have a secret, I'll hire a skywriter. Freddie Stewart is a very nice chap, Mr. Boynton. Very nice.
Well, I'm glad you like him, Miss Brooks, because that's part of my idea.
What is your idea, Mr. Boynton?
That you contemplate marrying him.
What? 5 years I'm going with the same man, and when he finally does propose, it's that I marry somebody else.
No, you don't understand. I don't mean actually contemplate marrying him. I mean just give Mrs. Davis the impression you're going to marry him after only one date. Don't you get it, Miss Brooks?
Yes, but I'm not sure I want it.
I feel certain it'll work. When Mrs. Davis thinks that someone she cares about is doing something hastily, she may reconsider her own position. Then you can suggest she test out Henry tonight.
Well, since we haven't any time to lose, it's at least worth a try.
Of course it is.
All right, then. Right after school, I'll dash down to the 5 and 10 cent store.
5 and 10 cent store? What for?
If I'm thinking of getting married, the least thing I'm entitled to is an engagement ring. Entree.
No, it's me, Mrs. Davis.
I know. Come in, Mrs. Davis.
My, you're home early this afternoon, dear. But why are you packing?
I'm not really packing, Mrs. Davis. Just throwing a few things into my valise. I'll be back in a few days.
But, Connie, why didn't you tell me you were taking a trip?
Well, this one came up suddenly, and it seemed so insignificant it was hardly worth mentioning.
Why not, Connie?
I'm getting married.
Well, Connie, even an insignificant trip like that is worth telling me about since you're getting married. Connie, when did you decide to do that?
About an hour ago, during a lull in the conversation. We're getting married this evening.
Well, I think it's simply wonderful, dear.
Huh?
Of course, it's what we both dreamed about all these years, that someday Mr. Boynton would propose.
Oh, I'm not marrying Mr. Boynton. It's Freddie Stewart.
Freddie Stewart? Freddie Stewart asked you to marry him, and you accepted?
Certainly. I didn't have anything else planned for this weekend, did I?
He asked you an hour ago, and you're getting married tonight?
Yes, Freddie said he doesn't believe in long engagements.
But, Connie, marriage is the most important step of your life. You have a whole lifetime to live together. It takes months to get to know a man properly.
Oh, now, Mrs. Davis. I will admit, if you hadn't gotten the idea first, I might not have accepted so readily.
Well, Connie, maybe I was wrong. Maybe we're both being a little hasty. I tell you what, dear. If you'll tell Freddie you want a little time to reconsider, I'll put Henry to the acid test tonight.
The acid test? I didn't mean for you to disfigure him for life.
No, what I meant was this. Since you think he's chasing me because I own this house and have a little money,
I'll prove to you that you're wrong.
How?
Well, we'll simply reverse positions. You'll be the owner of this house. And what's more, I'll pretend to be your servant. If Henry still wants to marry me then, that should convince us both of his integrity, shouldn't it? Well, Connie, what do you say?
What am I paying you good money for, Maggie? Get back in the kitchen and start dinner.
Well, Connie, how do I look?
Oh, like the perfect maid, Mrs. Davis. You did a swell job on that dress in
Do you
such
like
a hurry.
it, dear? I just sewed a little lace on an old black dress I found in the attic. But I'm afraid I cut it a little short. My knees haven't felt this drafty since 1926.
Oh, this must be Henry now. You better go inside and give me a few minutes alone with him before you announce dinner.
All right.
Oh, hello. You must be Henry Pringle.
Yes, my dear, Henry Pringle. And you must be Miss Brooks. Ah, I've heard so much about you. Believe me, my dear, there isn't a morning when my little sweetheart phones in a meat order that your name doesn't come up.
I know. I go well with calves' brains. But won't you come in, Mr. Pringle?
Just Henry.
Well, come in, just Henry. Walk right in.
Thank you, thank you.
Margaret's already told me a good deal about the two of you.
Yes, we're about ready to enter the sacred state of matrimony. Where is my little girl, Miss Brooks? I've brought her a little something.
Oh, how nice. A box of candy. What are they, caramels, nougats, or chocolate-covered creams?
They're meatballs.
How delicious. Chocolate-covered meatballs.
Well, everyone brings his fiancée candy, Miss Brooks. I've always felt it's more personal to bring one's lady love delicacies from one's own business.
It's lucky you're not a bricklayer. Well, it's a pleasure to welcome you here, Henry. I feel as if I almost know you already.
And I feel the same way. Margaret's told me so much about you, how you taught school and everything.
She told you I taught school?
You're not the school teacher?
Oh, gracious, no. That's only for people who have to earn a living. Or is the word scratch for a living? My, that Margaret certainly has a vivid imagination. Next, I suppose, she'll be telling you she owns this house.
She doesn't own this house?
Oh, now, really? Does a servant ever own her mistress's house?
She's your servant?
Henry, am I coming through clearly?
But, she never told me anything about that.
Well, let's go into the living room and wait for her. Only please watch those scatter rugs.
I simply can't believe Margaret's your servant.
Ah, here's Maggie now.
Dinner is served, Mum.
I warned you about those scatter rugs. Here, let me help you up.
No. I'll be all right.
Look what Henry brought you, Maggie. A box of meatballs.
Oh, Henry, you shouldn't have.
You can say that again.
Margaret, is all this true? Are you really Miss Brooks' servant?
Am I permitted to talk to my friend, Mum?
Permission granted, but keep it within 10 words, Maggie. We don't want dinner to get cold, do we?
Well, that's right, Henry, dear. Miss Brooks is my employer.
Then all about owning this house, your little nest egg, none of it's true?
Oh, that part about the nest egg is true.
It is?
Yes, indeed. Maggie found it in a tree in back 2 weeks ago. It ought to hatch any day now. Now, I know you both want to get started with your dinner as soon as possible, so go right ahead into the kitchen, Henry, and sit down.
Into the kitchen?
Yes, don't bump your head on the ironing board. That way, the sooner Maggie can serve me my dinner, the sooner you can get at the leftovers. Well, let's have no more talk now, right, Maggie?
Come in, Henry.
Just a moment, Margaret. I'm not very hungry. Frankly, I never expected all this.
Oh, I'm sorry if I exaggerated a little, dear.
A little? This isn't your house? No nest egg? You're Miss Brooks' servant?
But it really doesn't make any difference, does it? as long as we have each other.
Well, frankly,
It doesn't make any difference, does it, Henry? You said last night, regardless of what, love would find a way.
And right now it's looking awfully hard.
Well, Margaret, to be perfectly honest,
Aye. I'll take it. Walter, what are you doing here? You're not due to pick me up for 12 hours yet.
Yeah, well, I was passing in my car, so I thought I'd drop off some books I borrowed from you.
Thanks, and bye.
Oh, hi, Mrs. Davis. Hey, what are you all dressed up for? Going to a masquerade?
No, Walter, I'm not going to a masquerade.
No masquerade?
No, but you're going to a funeral.
Gee, that's a very clever costume. Hey, if I didn't know you owned this place, I'd swear you were a maid.
Walter, blow.
Have I overstayed my welcome already, Miss Brooks?
On this earth by about 16 years.
Gee, some people sure have their moods. Well, good night, everyone.
now, Margaret, perhaps you'll tell me the reason for this little game you've been playing.
I'm sorry, Henry, but I wanted to find out if you really love me. If you would love me if I had nothing in the world.
Oh, could you doubt it for a minute, Margaret, little girl? Could you, Margaret, child? Margaret, baby?
Once more, and she won't even be born yet.
I know it now. I was a fool, Henry. Can you forgive me? Please try to find it in your heart to forgive me for ever doubting you.
It will be difficult.
But he'll make it.
Believe me, Henry, I've learned my lesson. Nothing more will ever come between us.
Except the doorbell. I'll get it.
Good evening, Miss Brooks. Am I on time?
Well, what are you doing here this time of night, sir? And with a valise?
Ah, Margaret, darling, I see I am in time.
Osgood, what are you doing here?
What am I doing here? And who has a better right to be here than your husband? Very own husband.
My husband?
Certainly. Aren't you going to kiss me, sugar plum?
Well, if she doesn't, I am. It's certainly lucky you got here when you did, Osgood Davis.
Osgood Davis? Margaret, you mean you're really married to this guy?
Henry, of course I'm not. There's not a word of truth in it. This man is an imposter.
There, I won't argue. But he is your husband.
Henry, you don't believe this, do you?
I don't know what to believe anymore. But I'm certainly not taking any chances.
Attaboy.
Not after being mixed up like this 3 times before.
What? Then you're not a bachelor.
Margaret, girl, I haven't been a bachelor since I ran away from junior high with my French teacher.
If he'd said English, I'd have screamed.
So if you'll excuse me, I'm getting out of here.
Oh, dear, this is terrible. It's terrible. Then Henry really is the sort of man you told me he was, Connie.
With a number of embellishments I had no idea of.
But Osgood, how did you happen to come over tonight?
Well, when Boynton told me this afternoon of the tragic mistake you were about to make, Margaret, I knew I had to do something to prevent it. Particularly when he said you wouldn't believe a word of what I told Miss Brooks.
But how did you think of this husband role, Mr. Conklin?
Well, that was just a shot in the dark, Miss Brooks.
Well, luckily everything worked out fine, and I believe I have an idea how we can prevent this sort of thing from happening again.
How, dear?
From now on, I'll do the ordering by phone.
It's frequently said that behind every great man, there's a woman. And our Miss Brooks, who teaches English at Madison High School, is convinced of the validity of that remark. It's true that in the years she's been going with Philip Boynton, there may have been times when he's been unaffectionate or even inattentive toward her. But of one thing she's been certain, that one and only one woman has had any influence on his life.
Yes, indeed. And that woman, I'm proud to say, is his mother. I wouldn't wouldn't say that Tilsy is tied to his mother's apron string, because since I've known her, she's never worn an apron. However, he certainly depends on his mother's opinion in practically everything. At times, this isn't bad, because I know she's fond of me, and her impending Thanksgiving visit this past week seemed to produce some excellent results. Last Wednesday morning, Mr. Boynton broke a precedent and invited me on his customary early morning nature walk. It was beautiful in the park early in the morning, and as we walked along, with the sun barely visible above the treetops, I felt that Mr. Boynton, just as I, could feel the romantic implications of our setting. Suddenly he stopped, drew me toward him, and in a voice choked with emotion said,
Miss Brooks, look over there. A perfect specimen of the sharp-shinned hawk.
Mr. Boynton, is that all you have to say?
Oh, no. The sharp-shinned hawk lives almost entirely on small birds, frequently raiding chicken farms. They're also destructive to quails. However, they're almost never seen in this part of the country. Have you ever seen a rarer bird, Miss Brooks?
Only on the Madison High faculty. Mr. Boynton, is that why you asked me along on your walk this morning? To show me specimens of wildlife?
Well, no, there was another reason. It was partly Mother's doing.
I thought so.
Yes. She called me at school yesterday and must have spent half an hour giving me advice. You'd be surprised what she thinks of you, Miss Brooks.
You'd be surprised what I think of her, Mr. Boynton. But you shouldn't listen to everything your mother suggests.
Oh, I don't. Even though Mom was a school teacher herself for many years, she does come up with some pretty peculiar notions. Can you imagine? Now she's after me to get married.
As I say, follow everything your mother suggests. Right to the letter, Mr. Boynton.
Well, if the truth be known, I have thought about it, Miss Brooks. But Mom's idea is that a man should marry a much younger woman than himself. A very young woman, in fact.
A very young woman, Mr. Boynton?
Mom doesn't mean some girl in her teens. Someone more in her early 20s.
How much more?
According to Mom, most women follow that song, they're either too young or too old. Remember that song, Miss Brooks?
No, I can't say I do, Miss Boynton.
It was popular about 9 years ago.
Oh, well, that explains it. It was before my time.
9 years ago? That was before your time?
From now on, everything was before my time. That is, I don't remember every song from my early teens. Really, I don't know where you got
Hey, Miss
such
Brooks.
a type idea.
Isn't that Miss Enright standing over there next to that gnarled oak?
Why, so it is. For a moment, I couldn't tell them apart.
Oh, and now she sees us. I wonder what she's doing out here.
If I know Miss Enright, she was probably listening at the switchboard when your mother was speaking to you yesterday. She's been alternating with Harriet Conklin on the job since our switchboard operator quit again.
Well, if it isn't dear Mr. Boynton and his faithful bird dog. Imagine running into you out here. What a pleasant surprise.
For whom?
Good morning, Miss Enright.
My, this is a coincidental meeting, isn't it?
Yeah, particularly since you had those coincidental earphones over your coincidental ears at that coincidental switchboard yesterday.
Well, darling, whatever are you talking about? I'm always taking long walks early in the morning.
You really enjoy these nature walks too, Miss Enright?
Enjoy them. I adore them. Why, I can't think of anything I'm closer to than Mother Nature.
What about Father Time? Now, if you'll excuse us, Miss Enright.
Oh, now, Miss Brooks, if Miss Enright really is interested in nature, she'll want to know what I discovered.
Oh, indeed I would, Mr. Boynton.
Well, I just found a sharp-shinned hawk in the bushes back there.
Oh, really? I was wondering where you ran into Miss Brooks. You mean an actual bird. Oh, yes. Well, that is interesting. I'll bet you'll never guess what I ran into.
What?
A pair of the most beautiful field mice.
Oh, good. Then I'll be wearing my pinafore and pigtails. See you later.
Bye, Miss Brooks.
Oh,
Oh, Connie, there you are. I was hoping you'd be back soon. How was your walk, dear?
Well, it helped me to lose my appetite.
Oh, did you eat on the way?
No, we met Miss Enright.
Well, anyway, the walk gave your face a bright glow, dear. Why, you even look younger.
I ought to. I'm at least 9 years younger than when I started out.
I've got a big surprise for you this morning, dear. Some people I know you'll be glad to see are in the next room.
Really? What are their names?
Odell. Come along, dear. They're waiting for you. Well, here they are, Connie. Mr. George Odell and his father. Mr. Odell says he's an old grad of yours.
Well, I'm always glad to meet an old grad. How are you, George?
You're shaking hands with my father. I'm your old grad, Miss Brooks.
Oh, of course. How silly of me. Now, let's see. You must have graduated from Madison at least 3 or 4 years ago.
No, I was in your English class when you were teaching at Jefferson High 9 years ago. You were just starting to teach then.
I know. I began teaching there as soon as I got out of kindergarten. I was very young. You're probably just now getting started in the business world, eh, George?
No, George is a doctor, Miss Brooks.
A doctor. Well, that's just as well. The way I feel now, I'm going to need one.
I knew you'd be surprised to see me, Miss Brooks.
Oh, surprised isn't the word for it, George. How soon are you getting out of town? That is, how long are you staying in town?
Well, we were just passing through, Miss Brooks. George has a patient to see in town and wanted very much to see you again. And since I'm an old grad of your principal, Mr. Conklin, I thought it would be great to see him.
Mr. Conklin taught you, Mr. Odell?
That's right. At McKinley High 30 years ago. He was just starting to teach himself at the time. I wonder if he's changed.
No, he hasn't taught himself a thing since. So Mr. Conklin was teaching 30 years ago.
That's right. He was very young.
Well, if I know Mr. Conklin's reaction, he stepped right out of the cradle into that job. Well, it's certainly nice to see you both. I suppose you'll be in town at least a couple of hours.
Oh, we planned on being here longer than that.
How long? 3 or 4 hours?
No, dear. They're staying overnight. And Connie, since George tells me he was such an old favorite of yours, I have another little surprise for you.
What is it? I'm reasonably sure.
I've asked him to stay with us overnight. Now, isn't that a real surprise for you?
I may never recover.
I'm Radcliffe Hall.
Well, with Mr. Boynton's mother urging him to get married to a much younger woman, and with me doing my best to be that much younger woman, it was quite a problem when an old grad of mine decided to show up, particularly when said old grad happened to graduate from another school I had taught at 9 years ago, and was staying at my house the same night Mr. Boynton's mother was due for a visit. I was passing the refuse cans in the main hall at noon, deeply engrossed in my problem, when I suddenly ran into something soft.
No, Jeff!
My day is complete.
Oh, Mr. Conklin, I'm terribly sorry I ran into you, sir. Where are you?
Under the third refuse can on your left.
Well, I'm awfully sorry, sir. Can I help you up?
And why not? You helped me down. Of all the frightful, premeditated attacks you've made on my person, this is the worst. Just look at this suit. Well, luckily I can brush most of this stuff off.
Of course you can, and fortunately nothing happened to the brown hat you're wearing.
That happens to be the remains of a half cantaloupe. Suppose I should consider myself fortunate that I'm still in one piece. And it so happens I wanted to see you anyway. I have a message for you.
A message, sir?
Yes. A George Odell called to see if there was anything he could bring over to your house this evening.
Oh, yes, of course. George Odell. He's an old graduate of ours, sir. Graduated 2 or 3 years ago.
2 or 3 years ago, eh? He happens to be Dr. George Odell, Miss Brooks.
Well, he always was a quick student. Don't you remember him, sir?
Well, I can't say that I do, since I wasn't teaching at Jefferson High 9 years ago. Or was it 11 years ago?
I'll settle for 9.
However, I know how you feel, Miss Brooks, since I'm faced with a similar predicament. His father has the fantastic notion that I taught him 30 years ago. Can you imagine me teaching anyone anything 30 years ago?
No, sir. I have a tough enough time imagining it today. It does seem fantastic.
Why, 30 years ago, I was barely out of swaddling clothes. But frankly, Miss Brooks, I'd give anything if Odell Sr. didn't think I was the same man who taught him years ago.
But why, sir?
Well, I'm up for the job of assistant school supervisor for this district. That would mean my relinquishing this position. However, the one obstacle in my way is that Mr. Stone wants a slightly younger man. The truth of the matter is I'm going on 44.
Yes, sir, but where are you coming from? You don't look a day older, sir.
No, I know it. I've practically convinced Mr. Stone I'm young enough for the job. However, since Odell knows Mr. Stone, this could ruin the whole thing. I wish there was some way I could convince Odell I'm not the same man who taught him. Would you help me, Miss Brooks?
Oh, yes, sir. I'd do anything to to help you. It really shouldn't be too difficult if he hasn't seen you in all these years. Why, all you really have to do is shave off your mustache and darken your hair at the temples.
But he knows my name, Miss Brooks.
Well, you could put a junior in front of it and say you were old Osgood Conklin's son.
Yeah, it might work at that. But frankly, Miss Brooks, I haven't got the nerve to shave my mustache off myself. Would you be good enough to do it for me? I've got shaving cream and a razor in my... A razor in your hand!
Oh, don't worry, sir. I'd resist the temptation even if I didn't know how strict the police are about such things.
Well, I don't suppose there's much choice. Come along, Miss Brooks.
Yes, sir. Now, you just get out the shaving cream and razor while I get a cup full of water from the cooler, and we'll go to work.
Very well. Yes.
Ah, here we are. Now, just sit down and put your head back.
Oh.
There. Now, hold still while I apply this shaving cream. Mr. Conklin, stop touching my hand. This isn't going to hurt a bit. Now for a good dab of shaving cream. There. All right, sir, here we go.
Goodbye, old friend.
Now, there goes one side. Here goes the other. There we are.
How does it look, Miss Brooks?
Oh, fine, sir. I've never seen your face in the nude before.
Oh, Miss Brooks, wait up a minute. Oh, I'm glad we caught you before you left school.
Oh, hello, Walter. Harriet.
Hi, Miss Brooks. Did Daddy see you and give you the message?
Is it George Odell called?
And want you to call him back?
Yeah, we got the biggest surprise ever.
When we heard you taught this fellow.
9 years ago at another school.
And now...
He's a doctor.
I was wondering what happened to the Andrews sisters. One of you is Groucho. Does anyone else know about this old grad besides you two?
Oh, not that I know of, Miss Brooks. Harriet got the message from the new switchboard operator. The only other person who might have known about it's Miss Enright. She was showing the new operator how to use the switchboard.
I'm dead.
What difference does it make if anyone else does know about your old grad, Miss Brooks?
The reason is strictly personal. It has to do with Mr. Boynton and his mother coming over tonight.
Oh, I get it now. And with this Dr. Odell around, it'll make you seem a lot more, mature than you want to appear. Is that the ticket?
Uh-huh. And I wish I could use it to take the first train out of town.
Oh, gosh, Miss Brooks, that shouldn't be such a difficult problem to solve. Well, just ask the doc to cooperate and tell him he graduated from Madison a couple of years ago. Well, I'm sure Mr. Boynton doesn't remember every student.
Walter, you may have an idea.
Well, sure. Yeah, I'll just lend the doc a sweater of mine and a few other things, and he'll look like a very recent graduate.
You know, I think that might do it. Yes, I'm sure it will. Walter, I could kiss you.
Miss Brooks, you wouldn't.
Oh, don't worry about Walter and me, Harriet. As things stand now, I'm much too young for him. It's awfully nice of you to help me out this way, Doc.
Oh, not at all, Miss Brooks. I quite understand the situation now. Well, this Madison High sweater should help me look like a recent graduate.
Yes, and that beanie with 2 propellers helps even more. Now all you need is a silly grin on your face, and you'll look like every member of my senior class.
Well, I guess the Boyntons ought to be here any time now. Didn't you say 8:30, Miss Brooks?
Yes, that's right, and Mr. Boynton's always right on the dot.
Well, my watch says 8:30 and 30 seconds now.
Your watch is 30 seconds fast. George, although you look like a recent Madison graduate now, I'd like to avoid any slip-ups. So if I can get rid of the Boyntons without having them meet you, I'd prefer it.
Okay, then I'll stay in here until you want me, Miss Brooks.
Good. Well, Mrs. Boynton, how are you?
Well, Miss Brooks, and how are you?
Well, you're looking just as fine as ever.
Well, you're looking just as fine as ever, too.
Well, you certainly haven't changed a bit.
Well, you certainly haven't changed a bit either.
Well, this time you go first. Please come in. Come in, Mr. Boynton. Well, it certainly is a pleasure to have you two over.
Well, it certainly is a pleasure for us to be here.
Well, oh, no, you won't trap me into that again. Now that you're both here at my house, I have an excellent idea.
What?
Let's go out to a movie.
Movie? Miss Brooks, Mother had a rather tiring trip. Would you mind if we stayed home tonight?
Not at all. Let's go back to your home and stay there.
Well, what Philip meant is that we'd prefer to visit with you here this evening. Now, that wouldn't inconvenience you, would it?
Oh, no, of course not. But it's rather stuffy in here. The heating system's on the blink, and it's awfully warm.
Anyway, Miss Brooks, we're both extremely anxious to meet the old grad Miss Enright told me about.
Yes, sir, it's getting warmer by the minute.
What a fantastic story she told me about him, too. Wait till you hear it, it'll kill you.
It may, at that.
She said he graduated in your class 9 years ago when you were teaching at another school.
Why, 9 years ago, you were probably just getting out of high school yourself.
The ink was barely dry on my grammar school diploma, Mrs. Boynton. But if you'd like to meet our old graduate, George Odell, he's reading in the other room. Oh, Georgie! Wait till you see him. He graduated from Madison 3 years ago. Yes, ma'am? Do you want me, ma'am? Yes, Mr. Friday. George. Say hello to Mr. Boynton and his mother.
Hello.
I hope we didn't interrupt your reading, George.
Oh, that's okay. I'd gotten through the part where the Batman killed the purple giant with his ray gun.
As you can see, a typical graduate of Madison High. George graduated 3 years ago.
3 years ago? Well, that's strange. I would have remembered him if he graduated then.
Well, certainly you can't remember every student who graduated from the school, Mr. Boynton, but George said he remembered you, didn't you, George?
Yeah, sure. Mr. Boynton's the best French teacher I ever had.
I teach biology.
It probably sounded like French. What did you expect? If you can't remember him, why should he remember you?
But I remembered most other students, Miss Brooks. Did you participate in any extracurricular activities, George?
Well, I was on the debating team 3 years ago.
I was coach that year.
Well, it's certainly too bad nobody bothered to introduce you two. But I don't see why... And very welcome, too. I'll get it. Miss Enright.
Good evening, Miss Brooks. I was just driving by, so I thought I'd drop in and see Mrs. Boynton and meet that old grad of yours. You don't mind if I come in to you, darling?
I don't know what else I can do with your foot in the door.
Good evening, Miss Enright.
Well, Mr. Boynton, and your dear, dear mother. How are you, dear, dear Mrs. Boynton?
One more dear, and you'll be over the limit.
Oh, and this must be your old graduate, Miss Brooks.
Funny, George graduated from Madison 3 years ago, but I can't seem to remember him. Can you, Miss Enright?
Of course I can. Suddenly I'm beginning to feel faint.
Oh, Miss Enright. Miss Enright, what is it?
Oh, I don't know. Everything's beginning to go round. Please, maybe you'd better get me a doctor. Good heavens, she's fainted.
Maybe if I slap her face, it would bring her around.
Oh, no, let me have the fun.
I should get some water.
Oh, that's an idea. Mr. Boynton, dash out into the kitchen and get a bucketful, and we'll throw it on her.
Oh, where am I?
In the middle of the best sickbed scene since Camille. Oh, I have such pain. Get me a doctor. Please, get me a doctor quickly.
All right, Miss Enright, if you'll wait a moment, I'll see what I can do. I've got my little black bag in the closet.
Your little black bag?
He's got to have some place to put his little comic books, doesn't he?
Now, here we go, Miss Enright.
Well, what do you know? He's a doctor.
Then it was true. He did graduate 9 years ago.
Just as I was getting out of grammar school.
Now, where does it hurt, Miss Enright?
Well, I feel somewhat better now, Doctor. My trouble seems to have passed.
Mine's just beginning. Yes, it's true, Mrs. Boynton. Dr. Odell was my pupil 9 years ago, and I'm not 21.
I'll take it this time, Miss Brooks. That's probably Dad getting back from his visit with Mr. Conklin. Hello, Dad.
Hello, George. Well, Miss Brooks, you have quite a little gathering here, haven't you?
How are you, Mr. Odell?
Why, Sally Boynton, as I live and breathe.
I beg your pardon. Do I know you?
Know me? Don't you remember little Harry Odell? The kid you were teaching when I was at Wadsworth Junior High 35 years ago?
Eureka!
You must have the wrong woman. I was a mere slip of a girl 35 years ago. Why, you yourself can't be over 40.
Well, that brings George down to 19 and me back to 21. Thanks, Mr. Odell.
Oh, well. Anyway, Miss Brooks, what difference does age make? If I've said that to my Philip once, I've said it to him 50 times recently.
But, Mother, for the last few weeks, you've been insisting...
You heard your mother, my Philip. Mr. Boynton. And I agree with her. There's only one age qualification that I must insist on.
What's that, Miss Brooks?
That the Justice of the Peace is young enough to remain standing throughout the ceremony.
Once again, here is our Miss Brooks.
Well, when Mr. Odell Sr. recognized Mrs. Boynton as his old teacher, it appeared to settle the age problem once and for all. However, all precincts hadn't been accounted for. I'll get it. Hello?
Hello, Miss Brooks. This is Mr. Conklin. I want to thank you for that brilliant little scheme of yours.
Why, sir? Didn't you get the job?
I most certainly did not.
Didn't my scheme work out?
Oh, your scheme worked fine. Much too fine.
Then how could Mr. Stone think you're too old for the job?
He doesn't. Now he thinks I'm too young. know, Miss Brooks, there are times when I wish you'd resign from Madison.
Well, if you wait a little while, that might not be necessary, Mr. Conklin.
What do you mean?
A few more days like this, and I'll be old enough to retire.